Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for USports football. Me and Tom are back on the mics, setting up the final weekend of OUA action. Week 9 is here upon us. There are a lot of things to get figured out in the standings. We're going to go through some of the scenarios based on our picks. We'll take you around the league, looking at the rest of the action across USports, and we'll start off with a little peek at the current top 10, but not before I say, Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing so well, my man. Well, yes, it's bittersweet because the regular season is coming to a close, and this will be the last week for a few teams before their seasons are done. This is, without a doubt, the best lineup of games that we've had all regular season, both in the OUA and in the surrounding area, in the surrounding U Sports. My God, am I excited for this weekend.
And obviously, these OUA games we're going to go through are filled with major playoff circumstances on the line, and we get CanWest football back in our lives. So what more do you want? And it's Laval, Montreal going on Sunday as well. So what a weekend we have in store for us. Let's start with a quick look at the new USports top 10. 1 through 10, it goes Laurier, Western, Laval, Montreal, Saskatchewan, St. Mary's, jumping up over the Regina Rams at 7, Queens, Bishop, and entering the top 10 for the first time all season, the team with the bluest of blue collars, the goldest of gold swaggers, hailing from a little town called Little Rock, Arkansas, Wind City at the end of the 401, under the shadow of the Golden Arches, the guidance, the tutelage, the mentorship of one JP, the Don Surselli, the Windsor Lancers, sit at number 10 in the U Sports top 10 rankings going into the final week of OUA action. Tom, what do you make of this list?
Well, we were talking about this beforehand. I think the top 5 is solid. I think you can argue about, a couple of spots here or there, but for the most part, I think they got that right. Although I would have Western down maybe a little bit. But anyways, top 5 is pretty good. It's the bottom 5 that's obviously where the changes have come into place here. St. Mary's leaping over Regina. I mean, when you have a dominant win against the former Loney Bowl, the former conference champion from last year, that has to warrant some kind of bump up for sure. Regina didn't play last week, so obviously you take that with a grain of salt. But having St. Mary's there, I don't mind. It's the Bishops at 9 and Windsor at 10 that I think you and I both kind of flagged there. I mean, with Windsor's incredible victory against an Ottawa team, the travel that required, and now completely controlling their own destiny if they get the win against Queens this weekend, I think that deserves them to be in that number 9 spot right below the Gales, and especially with that Bishops loss, and it was a bad loss to St. Mary's, I think they should be at the number 10 spot and Windsor should be at number 9.
I mean, Bishops has lost twice to St. Mary's, and they beat a Silas Fagnon-less St. FX team. So really not terribly impressed with what they've done so far this year. The craziest thing about it is I still don't know who else is a likely candidate to win the MVP of that league, but Justin Quirillon. His numbers have still been good on the year, but those 3 games just haven't instilled much confidence in where they're at right now. Windsor definitely should be ahead of them, and I think we were mentioning that's probably that maybe Manitoba nipping at the heels. What's interesting is they have McGill and Sherbrooke in a similar tie, receiving 2 points. I think that would clearly have to be McGill, just the way that they have played Montreal so tough and the way they're just running the ball. I feel like Manitoba and McGill are really the only other 2 teams that could really make a run for it beyond that. I mean, your McMaster Marauders, frankly. I mean, after this week, some very interesting things could be in the card for your boys there in the Maroon. So we'll talk about what lays in store for McMaster in a little bit. Let's jump into the action, and we're going to start off with a game. It's a full 1 o'clock slate, and you know what? It's frustrating, but in some ways, given the amount of well, actually, let me throw it to you like this first, Tom. We're going to talk about York at Guelph to start things off. Is there something to be said about the fact that as we kind of set up and when we go through the games based on our predictions, we're going to go through what we think the standings will look like going into the playoffs and what those first round matchups will be? Is there something to be said about the fact that given that teams will still scoreboard watch, even though the games are still happening at the same time, that I don't have an example off the top of my head of an outcome that would necessitate another outcome not happening, but Is it makes sense to say, you know what? If, for example, one of these games happened at 1 and one of them was at 4, and the outcome of the game at 1 made the game at 4 completely irrelevant,
Mhm.
does it make more sense that, all right, hey, we stick them all at 1 o'clock? So even though scoreboard watching is going to happen, there's nothing definitive. And again, I don't have a prime example here necessarily. I mean, I suppose that if if Guelph, if Guelph beats York, that eliminates York from contention. If York were to win, then that keeps them still alive, given that they beat Mac, so on and so forth. Does it make sense from that standpoint, maybe, that in this week, and I'm not going to give them credit to say that they planned this, because obviously there's so many weeks that we just get these at 1 o'clock when the diversity of time slots is both available and would make for a better viewing product. It's part of me that actually doesn't mind it in this case, but there obviously is still that just viewer consumer standpoint that makes it frustrating. What's your read on it for this week of all weeks?
Yeah, well, I think we talked about this previously. I think it comes down to the universities, the home teams that are setting the timing here. So from that standpoint, depending on what they're viewing as what's important, who knows when it comes to the OUA schools and why they want to do the things that they want to do. But yeah, I do see the value in every game's at 1 o'clock, so every game is viable. Literally every single matchup here means something. If Ottawa beats a Toronto team, how much and how much, that's going to factor into things. If Toronto obviously beats Ottawa, that opens up a whole other layer of what could happen. And that's pretty much the exact same for the entire gamut that we have here. If one team beats another team, it completely changes what the makeup would be. It's actually the one game that you and I are going to this week, which is Western Laurier, does the least when it comes to the actual playoff structure, because one of them is going to be one, the other one's going to be two, although it's probably going to be the very best game of the week. Yeah, I don't mind it as much as I normally do for that reason, but still want to have a few games at some other time so that we can watch them live.
Most definitely. And, if it weren't for being in London, we certainly would make a case for being at Guelph in the Royal City, where they're taking on the York Lions. Both of these clubs sitting at 2-5 right now on the season, a spot that neither of these fan bases, certainly not me, expected these clubs to be in at week 9. But at the end of the day, they're still here with playoff potential on the line with this game. York coming off that tough loss against Western. Though, of course, some positive offensive production. We talked about that on the review pod from week 8. We'll talk about it a bit more here, no doubt. And a Guelph team that, as much as anyone else in the league, has been super banged up, coming off the bye, perhaps at no better time than they could have required it. What do you make of this matchup? What do you make of the standpoint of a team in York that is kind of been on the resurgence of the last 2 years with Coach Janke coming in, needing to kind of learn how to win in these moments? We saw them in a similar spot last year, falling short to your Marauders in a week 9 matchup with playoffs on the line. And they give it Guelph, though obviously only second year for Coach Soria. A lot of players in this team who have playoff experience, this whole core in a tight game against Western in the semifinals last year. A lot at stake here. How much of that aspect do you play into it, given the reputation or the experience of these clubs in these high leverage moments? Because, let's be real, this is a playoff game for these two squads.
Yeah, I think that if you're looking at it from an experience standpoint, it definitely goes to the Guelph Griffins, especially because, as you just said, this entire core played in the playoffs and played a semifinal against Western, and for the most part did pretty well against the Mustangs last year. So obviously the experience side goes in Guelph's favor. The fact that it's at home, that fan base is probably going to be out full force. Maybe not obviously with the hill like homecoming, but the grandstand is definitely going to be up there. It's going to be senior night. It'll be the whole kind of kit and caboodle that's out there. The other side of this as well, and we'll obviously get into the actual preview of the game and diving into the teams. When you look at all of the other teams that are on this list and all of the other teams that have from week 1 to now, I think in every aspect, you can see growth, that you can see there's been development. I don't know how much we've really seen out of the York Lions so far this year, especially offensively. Now obviously they're doing a lot of passing plays and a no huddle offense. There's a lot of intricacies that you may not be able to see, especially if you're not in the room itself looking out at that. And I'm very much willing to say that I am not nearly as smart an offensive mind as Tommy Dennison is. I can definitely say that. But from a no huddle offense, from an offense that really doesn't put a lot of emphasis on running the football as much, and obviously when you've got a great quarterback in Keegan Hall, you can see why. But it feels kind of like there's teams that have been out there that have seen what's going on here and kind of figured out what the best game plan is to go about this. Even, you see a Western squad, and credit to that York offense last week. Keegan throws for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns, and a lot of really great things there. But you can see a Coach Gleason offense where he's got Max von Muhldorfer, and he's got him roaming around as a linebacker. So when Keegan Hall calls a slide protection, he goes to the backside, and now you've got Big Max number 55 on a running back because of the slide protection, the pass blocking rules, and there's a bunch of other stuff that you can hide as a defense when you're trying to read them at the snap or before the snap here. So a lot of interesting things from that standpoint, wanting to see what kind of a York team we have coming out here, because exactly like you said, this is a playoff game, and Guelph's going to have their very best out, at least from an atmosphere standpoint.
When you talk about the growth piece, I think there's an argument to be made that similar with Guelph, I don't know really if we've seen much growth from them. Part of the similarity for both these clubs, though, is that just trying to have your starting guys on the field has been more of an emphasis than any progress you can. Like, that's progress alone. Throughout the cliche, availability is your best ability, or whatever it goes. Like, you need your guys out there. And, like, we made a whole big deal about that offensive performance that York had against Western. And a lot of that, as we highlighted, and the stats still haven't been updated on the matter. A lot of it, and you went through those drive summaries, Western just scoring like that York was back on the field, and they're taking these shots because they got down early. For Guelph, obviously, we saw all year, and this was like one of the big frustrations for me with this team is that by the numbers, they're moving the ball, they're moving the changes, they're getting first downs, they're just not executing the red zone. We know their kicking game has been abysmal this year and marred with not controversy, but marred with switching kickers disappearing on the team for reasons, what have you. So, like, in a spot where they know they can't even rely on threes, and they weren't getting in the end zone. So having all these stats showing that their offense is a top squad, all these things, the points weren't reflecting on that. And then on the flip side, because I don't know how recently this got updated, it seems like the OUA, and I would assume USports as well, has fixed its stats for defenses on rush yards per game. And what's similarly perplexing, Tom, is that by the yardage, both in the air and on the ground, Guelph's about, fourth, fifth in the league in terms of yardage they're giving up. But then they're fourth in terms of, they're fifth in terms of the points that they're giving up at 30.4 points. So this weird thing that seems to be happening on both sides of the ball, and maybe the common thread is the fact that the special teams isn't doing it for them on either side of the ball, but a team that moves the ball well but doesn't seem to be able to score when needed, and a team that can seemingly limit the other team moving the ball, yet still gives up 30 plus points. It's like, it's so bizarro that shouldn't be a thing. And all the while, a team that's getting after the quarterback pretty well, getting a good amount of interceptions. Like, this Guelph team is so strange this year. And I know it's the injuries and the special teams have been in a tough spot, but getting to finally see these rush yards as well and finally get a clear sense of just by the numbers what we're seeing on the defense, it feels like the exact same song and dance, but just flipped around from the offense, where, again, on offense, they're moving the ball, but they're not always scoring. And defense, they're limiting teams, but teams are still scoring on them. Maybe it just is as simple as that special teams component, or maybe it's they're giving up big plays. I don't know what to chalk it up to, but it's frustrating, Tom. It's mightily frustrating, and York seems like the type of team that offensively could be able to take advantage in some of these components.
Yeah, I think a lot of that goes back to the special team side of things that you and we have been talking about. There's been a lot of big returns against this Guelph Griffin team. Some of them have been touchdowns, but even, if you change the fact, instead of starting from your own 25-yard line, if you're starting from your 40 or your 45 or even higher than that, Obviously, that shortens the field a whole lot so that, yeah, you may not be giving up a whole bunch on the run game or in the passing game, but it's because the teams are starting 20, 30, 40 yards closer. And I don't know that that's always the case. And I'm not here to just completely go after Guelph's special teams, but it certainly has not been up to the same standard that I think you and I have held them to from that standpoint as well. I think that having a being in a spot where you cannot confidently rely on a kicker on a 3-point game here forces you to get into a lot of third down gambles where you're bringing in Marshall McRae, where you're starting to throw the ball a little bit more, and especially when both quarterbacks have been dinged up here, it just doesn't put you in the best spot. So once again, love whoever updated this, whoever did this, thank you. Whatever the social acceptable way to say that to a person, just thank you for doing this. This is so fantastic that our stats are updated, even if we think that that's the bare minimum of what should be here.
For doing their job, round of applause. Great. Continue, Tom.
Listen, with all
There's
the other
bugs
stuff
in the system. There's bugs in the system.
with all the other stuff that we have to deal with here, man, I'm just starting to be thankful when stuff works properly.
Tom, you don't know what was going on in the truck in that 2022 Yates Cup. You have no idea what was going on in the truck, what those people were dealing with. Anyways, continue, Tom.
Memories like elephants over here. My goodness. But yes, this is a Griffin defense that has dealt with a lot of injuries. They didn't have Demetrius Masuka for so long here. And once again, I don't think we could properly highlight how much of a difference this team is without Mortuzo in the lineup. This defense just seems to be completely different. There's a few more holes than I normally remember seeing from last year. This is not the Guelph team that I think you or I were really expecting coming out the gate here. I think we were expecting that they'd be in a flip scenario here where they're potentially 5-2 going into the last part of the season.
Yeah, no, it's literally exactly where we thought we had them being in. You know, the one thing I'm picking Guelph, and you're going to hear in a moment. We're going to throw it to a little conversation we brought Dakota Vine because him and I made a little bet on this one, a little wager. It seems to be the mood around at the 55 that we like to make sporty based bets, and I like it more than gambling money. So I'm definitely taking Guelph, and the thing, frankly, that makes me the most bullish on it at the end of the day, even if it looks sloppy for Guelph. We just saw what Western did on the ground against this team, and obviously Western's ground game, you went over it on the Week 8 review. By the numbers, it's arguably their most dominant run game they've, you could make a case to say, ever had, given that Ethan Dolby is now the leading, is or will become undoubtedly, is, right? He's now the leading single season rusher in Western Mustangs history. Ethan Dolby is the single season rush leader for the Western Mustangs. I had to say that twice to let that sink in. Not a shot against him. It's just it's so remarkable that we got to see that this year. All the great things we saw, what an amazing accomplishment that is. Add in what EJ was doing with Laurier in terms of setting records this year. It's been an amazing year of OUA football. But I just think about the fact that O-line for Guelph, it got Stretchinger back 2-3 weeks ago. I don't know if you have an update on Pyle. The shake of the head tells me no there. But Donovan Malloy was out in that last one, and it comes back to the injuries. I don't know how they can't run the ball in this game. Maybe York's going to sell out to stop the run, and I just think that I would give Guelph such an edge in their run game versus York's rushing defense that the level of selling out York would have to do to slow him down would have to open up the passing game for Guelph, though albeit a passing attack that we have been less than enthused with, in large part that receiving core playing a bit below where we thought they could be at this year. We know they lost some guys as well. I just have to imagine they can get it done on the ground. The question is, though, if Keegan Hall is putting up points for York early on, it might not allow Guelph the ability to just sort of ground and pound it out, kind of a la what we saw in the Yates Cup last year, where once Laurier got up, Western couldn't do what they wanted to do in just running the ball, even when they would break out 20, 30 plus yards. So to me, that's the path for victory to them. we mentioned the foibles on special teams. York is clearly not all that sharper than Guelph. Frankly, I would say that their special teams units are weaker than where Guelph's have been at this year. Though, of course, you certainly like the fact that they have a guy, Nathan Walker, who can kick the ball at least. But to me, that's got to be where it is. I need Guelph to just come out, pound the rock, chew up that clock. Don't let York be able to take these big strikes. Don't let them get the ball that much. Wear them down, break their spirit, all this type of thing, and just hope that you can just win it that way. I don't know. What's the path for success for you for well, Guelph or for York as well?
Yeah, I think Guelph really needs to establish their run game here. I mean, when you start looking and comparing things from last year to this year, even looking at Tristan Abu's numbers, last year, 1,959 yards, 13 touchdowns to 6 interceptions with a 68% completion rating. This year, 1,928 yards, 7 touchdowns to 6 interceptions with a 63.5% completion rating. And let's not forget that this is 7 games. In 7 games, he's almost done the exact same thing that he did in 8 games in the regular season last year, which to me says he has not been able to rely on the run game nearly as much as they were last year. Because of that, he's had to throw the ball so much more. He's put in bad situations. And now the fact that he doesn't throw, he actually has, as it stands right now, he had 191 attempts last year. He's at 192 right now, thrown 6 interceptions in both scenarios here. I think that this offense has changed up a lot because of their inability to run the ball at least consistently here. I was expecting Isaiah Smith to really pop off, and once again, he shows flashes of just brilliance. When he grabs the ball, he puts his shoulder down, he runs over a guy, or he leaps over somebody else. Like, he just shows it, but for whatever reason, it's not really translating all that well on the field itself. When Donovan Malloy is back in the lineup, it is a complete game changer. Caleb Sargent, we haven't seen all year as well. Coming off of a bye week, I have to imagine that this is going to be the healthiest version of the Guelph Griffins that we could possibly get. If you're on the edge here, you could go, you could not go. I have to imagine that everybody's going to hammer that I'm ready to go, I want to play kind of thing. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Ethan Pyle back in the lineup. Wouldn't be surprised to see Donovan Malloy back in the lineup. I don't know what the status of Caleb Sargent is, but obviously they're going to need every single body they possibly can to do their very best work here. And I think a Guelph victory looks like dominating the run game and allowing Tristan Abu to sit back with a little less, defenses coming with their ears pinned back.
And then for York, is it just chuck that thing downfield and hope that your Nick Adair's, your CJ Vincent's, your Cairo Bears, your Avante McCoys can just make some splash plays? We love Melkus. We love it when they hand it off to Avante as well in some of those jet sweep plays. I don't think that they can, effectively drive the ball downfield consistently, relying on that run play. Is it just as simple? I mean, simple of just saying, hey, look, we got one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Season's on the line. Put the ball in his dang hands. Look what he did against Western last week, and see if he can make it happen.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what we just talked about with Guelph, how much and how what they're really going to be doing to rely on the run game here. The way that you stop this team is by getting up on them and forcing them to not be able to run the ball at least as consistently as they want them to. With that, that's going to mean Keegan Hall and this passing attack has got to be operating at the very highest of levels here. I think you've already kind of made your bed in that we are going to go as far as Keegan can take us here, and that's where it kind of has to be. Now, the interesting piece, once again, once you start getting into the latter parts of the season here, you start looking at things, you see an offense that's really designed around Keegan, around the things that he's doing, comparing it to last year. So this year, Keegan Hall, 236 passing attempts, which is wild, 64% completion rating, 1,924 yards, 10 touchdowns to just 2 picks, compared to last year with the McMaster Marauders, where he's got 284 attempts in 8 games, a 70% completion rating, 2,529 yards passing, 10 touchdowns to just 6 interceptions. So I think he has gotten a lot smarter with how he gets the ball out. But still, even though we're saying, you don't really have a run game all that much, he's still not throwing the ball nearly as often as he was with Mac last year, which is just a crazy thing to kind of speak on. But still, you are going to win this game on the back of Keegan if you are going to win this game. You have to make sure that he's getting in. You have to give him as much protection and as much time as you can. And with a receiving core that I think is really underperformed for how good I think they can be in that York team, I want to see CJ Vincent go off. I want to see Avery Ford go off. I want to see Nicholas Adair continue to go off. He had that one big game last week. I'd need to see it again in this one. If York wants to win this, they have to get up and they have to get up early to get Guelph out of the game plan that they want to do.
It's amazing the parallel between this year and last year from the standpoint that Guelph wins the At the 55 Bowl last year, and they have themselves in a scenario in which they're a fourth seed hosting a playoff game, having missed the playoffs the year prior. This year, and then all the while, Mac is hosting York in a last week of the season game with their playoffs on the line and a trip to Western on the line for the first round playoff game. Flip the script this week. Your Marauders, we'll talk about it in a little bit, have themselves in a situation where they could sit in fourth place when it's all said and done with a home playoff game. And here we have Guelph in the Royal City hosting York, fighting for that seventh seed and a chance to go to Western in the first round of the playoff matchups. Oh, yeah. And Mac won the At the 55 Bowl this year. I guess that At the 55 Bowl kind of matters quite a bit. Tom, I imagine you are in lockstep with me on the on the Guelph pick.
Yeah, I'm going with the Griffins in this one. I think you get the healthiest version of what Guelph is, and a Griffin with its back against the wall, realizing that there is no tomorrow if they don't get this done, is a very dangerous spot to be in.
Well, there is another member of our At the 55 team who feels differently about how this game's going to go. His name is Dakota Vine, the man in the chair, the meme god himself. He joined us briefly, not just to go over his pick taking York, but to set up the little bet that him and I have on this game. So let's throw it to that real quick. All right, continuing with our York Guelph conversation, we have the man in the chair, the meme god himself, Dakota Vine, getting in on the action for a little wager him and I have on this one. Dakota, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, and I'm about to be doing a lot better after this Saturday game.
Yeah. Well, me and Tom already made our picks. I'm obviously going with the Griffins. I'm wearing the Griffin swag. Take us through your pick on this one.
I mean, I'm obviously rolling with the Lions. I talked to my boys there. They said they're going to show up for me, and I'm so confident that I'm saying that if they lose, I'm going to run from York Line Stadium down to varsity. But if they win, I'm expecting the same out of you.
Oh, 100%. I'm also probably just going to run it anyways when you inevitably have to run this one. But I came in super cocky when making a bet with Tom, and we're scheduling the dates when I'm biking from Guelph to Mac. So stranger things have happened. Dakota, obviously you're being behind the scenes, doing all your great work on social media, your connection with York, having coached there a few years back, and just with all these guys. What's your read been on this team? We obviously had you on earlier in the year talking about this squad, but it's obviously not gone the way a lot of us have hoped. Injuries played a big role in it, but through you having a variety of connections with the team, what's been your read on this team so far this year?
I'm reading it like a Braille book. For those that don't know, I cannot read a Braille book to save my life. I don't know. I feel like it's any given Sunday, except all the games are Saturday at 1 o'clock with them. Defense is young. They're not full of injuries, but they're young. And offense is clicking some days, not clicking some days. It's tough, but looking at that Western game, offense seemed to be clicking. I mean, you can only slow down Western's offense for so long. But I don't want to say confident because I'm never confident when it comes to betting with this team, but I'm gonna call it Malchus, I'm gonna call it Avante, hell, I'll call it Tommy Dennison, I'm gonna call it Jaden Dix, I'll call it Sterling May just to make it even on offense and defense. They gotta show up because I don't really want to run. I think Strava was telling me it's about 20 kilometers from York Lions Stadium to varsity. So I don't really want to run, but I'm confident enough to make this bet. I'm a degenerate enough to make this bet. I'll even say, hey, loser has to wear a helmet while they do the run. I know you got a Guelph helmet. I got a London Beefeater helmet. I have a Western helmet, but I probably shouldn't. Don't tell the equipment manager. Um, hell, I'll probably steal Malchus's helmet if the Lions lose. I got a couple players saying they'll run a couple clicks with us too, but I don't know. I'm more confident in Guelph's inconsistencies than anything. They I mean, heck, they probably shouldn't have beat Mac. Or they probably shouldn't have lost to Mac, and they did. And now you're biking, what is that? 150K?
Oh gosh, no.
No? Is it closer than that?
No, you know what? We got to actually work out the route because there's a very easy way we get it to 55 on the dot. So it's gonna be a beautiful Sunday.
I'm more so. I just like competitive wagers, and I love football, and I hate the OUA for making every single one of these games at 1 o'clock.
Well, we've been doing this long enough that we have to just grin and bear it because it ain't changed anytime soon. Dakota, final thoughts on anything going on this weekend, OUA related? Obviously, your Western Mustangs are playing in a huge game against Laurier, top seed, and the bye on the horizon. A lot of other action. You went through the Lord's work and figuring out all the playoff matchups based on the wins and losses. Are there any ones in particular that you're pulling for in terms of scenarios and just things that you're looking for this weekend?
I'm not going to bust my brain by thinking of ideal scenarios because, I mean, obviously I want York to make the playoffs, and for that to happen, 9 other things need to happen. It needs to have 2 rainbows and no rain. So I think I'm just looking back on when, Zach, you and I were on the pod in, 2019, and we were talking about, there's not a lot of parity in the league. It's very exciting to see a week. I don't remember the last time a week mattered for every single game. We like to say that every game matters, but every single game being played has an implication on those playing the game and also those outside of the game. So it's just exciting. Like I said, it's a shame it's all at 1 o'clock, but there's going to be, we like to say that, teams don't ever take weeks off, but there's definitely been a couple times where last week of the season rolls in and players are like, why do I really care? It doesn't really impact me. But I promise you, if you tell Toronto that them somehow winning by a certain amount of points can bump Ottawa all the way down to a certain spot or eliminate a different team, right? Sometimes players play better out of vengeance than they do out of competitiveness. So it's just exciting to see the fact that every single one of these games matters.
1000%. Well, Dakota, as always, be kind to yourself.
Be kind to yourself. Get your hokas ready, buddy.
I'm not on your level yet with those. All right, my friend. Peace.
Peace.
That was the man in the chair, the meme god himself, Dakota Vine, and us and me setting up our little bet there. In all likelihood, and I think I can speak for him as well, whoever ends up winning the bet will probably still do the run with the other from York to UofT. Let's move on to UofT because they're hitting the road to the nation's capital, take on the Ottawa GGs. UofT coming off of the bye week over Thanksgiving. Ottawa coming off of that tough loss when Windsor rolled into their house, nearly picking up the comeback victory. Tom, UofT got eliminated from the playoffs the week prior to the bye. It's a weird spot for them to be in. I can only imagine just the sort of mojo and the energy probably being a little bit off. You have that bye week, you're off for the weekend, you're out of the playoffs. That mind switch, that flip switch mentality, whatever you want to call it, probably kicks in a little bit. Not like I'll be the first to admit, like that at least that first year at Guelph, we were not making the playoffs. I'm a scout team guy. Once the season was done, wasn't too upset about it, right? And even years where I was playing, when it's a as much as we talk about the season goes by fast, it's a long season from training camp, all your summer workouts. And yes, we all want to be there raising up that beautiful trophy at the end of it and then some. But at a certain point, it does creep in your mind, you know what? I could use a little bit of a break now. So for UofT, it's going to be interesting to see sort of the mind space there. And as I've said a few times now, I walk by their practices every night when I'm heading home from work, and the energy is still really good in that building. It's awesome to see. Again, all the credit to Coach DA, what he's been doing there. Ottawa, man, oh man, this team literally needs a win. I don't think their destiny is written in stone for them right now with what the playoffs could hold for them. And more than anything, they need to put together 4 quarters of football. And on top of that, I don't know if we'll go through the numbers right now. they kind of need to beat UofT by a lot because there's a tiebreak scenario with them and Mac and Windsor that could crop up where specifically when it comes down to Ottawa and Mac, let's just say Mac's going into this weekend in a favorable position over these GGs. Tom, we have one team coming in that was eliminated 2 weeks ago, the bye week, all those things that make this an interesting situation for UofT to be in, on top of the fact they're having to travel to Ottawa, an Ottawa team that we really need to see a solid four-quarter effort from and who needs some points. What is your read on this game going into their final matchup?
Well, you start talking about how much this means to an Ottawa squad, and not just, yes, it could mean home field advantage if you win and everything else. If Ottawa loses this game, that'll be their third loss in a row to then limp into the playoffs here. And absolutely, if you lose this game, you're going to be traveling. That doesn't exactly set you up for success going into a playoffs where you and I have obviously both had some real success in the playoffs, in the OUA playoffs in particular here. I think for both of us, we had a pretty solid rhythm going into that playoffs and feeling pretty high and mighty when we eventually got into the start of that. It's pretty important to feel pretty confident when you're making it into the toughest part of your season. And if you're coming off of a 3-loss streak, ooh, that is not a spot you want to be in.
Yeah, no, just quickly, it was nice those years when we lose to you week one and then we'd go just on a run until we had to lose to you again in the Yates Cup. So you know what? Even when the mojo was going well for us, we still couldn't overcome your Marauders. Proceed, Tom.
Yeah, like you talk about how important this game is for these guys, and you talk about what this means to an Ottawa GG squad. Josh Jansen showcasing what he can do against some of the very best teams, and especially against Laurier, and then coming out in the previous two games and really just not showcasing, not being on the same page with his receivers at times. Obviously, the Panda game that we talked about, he's overthrowing his receivers a whole lot. We saw the same thing against Windsor last week as well. And I mean, it's just not typical of what an Ottawa GG team, especially an Ottawa GG offense, kind of looks like here. Now, with all that being said, Jansen is currently leading the OUA, at least in passing yards, with 2,265 passing yards, 13 touchdowns to 6 interceptions here. So it is an interesting spot to see yourself in because of how much you are relying on Josh Jansen. But once again, the lack of seeing Charles Asselin really being the focal point of this offense. We have not seen him have a single breakout game or anything close to what we saw last year. I don't know if that just means the big boys that they lost up front. I don't know if that means, we're going with Jansen because Ben Miracle last year was kind of struggling a little bit, so we had to rely on the run game a little bit more. But this Ottawa GG offense is certainly much different this year as compared to was last year. And earlier on, if just a few weeks ago, it looked like it was at the very top of its form. And over the past couple of weeks in particular, it has not looked the exact same at all.
I mean, you know what, like we talk about the sort of well-rounded nature of that offense. We talk about all these guys kind of coming out of the woodwork, that you have your core group of receivers, but then on any given weekend, you see your Emile Gregoires, your Gilbert Thibaults really go off. I'm forgetting the young man's name who had a really nice outing against Windsor. But at the end of the day, we make this comparison all the time with that 2019 MAC team of how effective they were, having this arsenal of weapons they could spread the ball out to, not hunker down on one guy, and how effective it was. I think of your Ottawa, the writing on the wall is that, we've seen the true ascension of Noah Avery to an OUA All-Star. Frankly, I think a first-team OUA All-Star is what's in the cards for him this year. But when you have a guy who's in, within the realm of conversation for MVP talks, which Charles Asselin certainly was last year, that top talent just clearly can take you further, because obviously last year they were still doing the back and forth with Ben Miracle as well, right? So the one thing that was consistent was better than anything they've done this year. And honestly, Jansen's numbers are good, and I still think that just by what he's shown over his career, obviously those top games against Laurier are really something to behold. But even that sort of average that we've come to expect, call it like a 19 for 26 performance, 250, 260 yards, two touchdowns, maybe an interception in there. That's sort of like that should be a baseline. Like you take that, but it just the proof of the pudding might just be that having someone like Charles Asselin at his best still makes you better than any other version that you can really hope to be. For U of T, oh, sorry, do you want to pick up on that? Sorry.
Yeah, just one last thing here. Ottawa this year is dead last in rushing, behind the McMaster Marauders, behind Carleton, behind everybody. They've only in 7 games, 642 rushing yards, averaging 91 per game. That is the lowest in the OUA compared to just last year, where they had rushed for almost 1,200 yards and sat at 6th in the OUA. So drastic difference in the style of offense that's obviously being played here.
Not too pretty.
Nope.
For U of T, you were making the case that, well, less of a case, but more of saying like, look, with where this team's been at, with how hot they started, with like nothing has changed fundamentally in terms of it's not an injury situation. It felt more like the one trick pony type situation. Then teams were able to sort of lock into what you're doing the most. But it's the same core guys that went to Ottawa to put a beat down on a Carleton team that really had not figured their stuff out. Arguably, they still haven't figured their stuff out in many regards. And you were trying to, speak some, speak some truth to me in terms of let's not just assume that this is going to be a walkover game for Ottawa. Partly, I think, with what we've seen from Ottawa of late in terms of this Jekyll and Hyde type of show that they've been putting on. And beyond just the offense not always clicking, the big thing to me that was like the red flag of red flags for them was seeing some of the sloppy play with penalties and mismanagement of special teams 2 weeks in a row with giving up touchdowns on special teams errors. That is just so unacceptable and stuff that we don't expect to see from this team. But beyond that, again, I'm not going to say you were, maybe going for the major upset alert, but like there's a tiny little bell of saying that like let's not sleep on this U of T team, and I think all those things we talk about with their culture and how positive Coach Adams has been for this program these 2 years. These are really the moments you get to see it, and we haven't, those conversations we've been hearing about, people talk about what's been going on at York and, former players talking this and that. Well, actually, U of T did have a little bit of that, but that guy kind of seemed to be out to lunch. Overwhelmingly, this has been a U of T team where we're like, there's nothing but positivity coming from that club, right? And we know so many of those coaches there and just what they bring to the table. I think this is a really interesting test for this squad with some of these young guys on there, with a young coaching staff, Coach DA finishing his second year, to say, hey, look, like our playoff lives are off the table now. We know this, but how do we show up when there's literally nothing for us in the standings to play for? It's an interesting spot to be in. And I think you were making an interesting take on just why we shouldn't just outrightly just kind of give up on U of T for this one.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a team at the very end of a season like this that has been eliminated, if the culture's not exactly there, then you're going into this game being like, man, why are we even doing this? This game doesn't matter anymore. I just want to be, as you mentioned previously, it's a long season. I just want to be back in my place and just kind of relaxing, enjoying myself. I don't think that that's what this U of T team is. I think that this is a U of T squad that's got a great culture and a great culture around work ethic. If that's the case, then you go into this being like, let's play spoiler. Obviously, you can't spoil it in terms of knocking Ottawa out of the playoffs, but you can very much make their lives so much more difficult in that playoff scenario if you are able to pull up the massive upset win here. This is still a U of T team that can throw the ball and can throw the ball pretty consistently. It's going to come down to how much change have they made? Because exactly like you mentioned, this is a squad that has been very much a one-trick pony. And this is an Ottawa squad that is third in the league in pass defense. So not exactly a great matchup if we see the exact same U of T team that we have in the previous couple of years. I mean, we talk about Danny Ferdinand and and Patrick Cumberbatch and what they're able to do on that weak side at bare minimum. I think that definitely going to be an uphill battle, but I don't think that this is going to be a scenario where U of T is given up before they've even tried. I think this is going to be a team that realizes they're not playing for a playoff spot, which takes away a ton of pressure, takes away everything else, and just saying, this is your last game. For a few of these guys, this will be their last football game ever. Go out on your own terms, ball out, and do something that's going to be memorable here. And I think when you combine that mentality with the work ethic that I know is at U of T, this is a dangerous U of T squad that I don't think is just going to be an easy dub for these GGs.
No, I think it'll be really fascinating to see also just that component we talked about for a few weeks in terms of, we mentioned, giving Scott Barnett against Mac 2 weeks ago, in their last matchup before the bye, his last home game, senior night, senior day, I guess it was being a day game, giving him that opportunity. What are we going to see from them in this one? You can make a similar argument. Hey, look, his last just game writ large as a U Sports athlete. Do we start to see them making a switch to a younger guy, whether it's Caleb O'Donoghue? Do we start to see some of those guys that have been maybe buried a bit deeper on the depth chart behind your Jake Oceans, behind your Chris Josephs, to be able to try to, again, find a bit of that chemistry, ride the momentum going into the offseason? Fascinating to see what is going to go on. The one thing, though, as we've talked about, I don't doubt we'll see from this squad is that they will be, I'm trying to think of the word, just buttoned up start to finish, that culture that we like from them. And these are the type of things that we expect out of our top teams, including Ottawa. But of late, it's been shaky. Not shaky enough, albeit, to knock me off picking them in this game. But it's, this is one of those games where it's so much more than a win I need to see from Ottawa to feel like I'm going to be confident in them picking up a first round playoff win or going any deeper than that. Tom, where are you going on this one?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm going with the GGs in this one. I think they just have too many weapons on that team, offensively and defensively, to drop this one. But exactly like you said, if they eke out a win here where it's like a 27-20 kind of final game, I won't feel good about this at all, and I'm sure the GGs won't either. I want to see a dominating fashion from these guys to really showcase that, yeah, we had a rough couple game stretch there where the other teams got the better of us, but this is who we are. We are a team that can really dominate and play. That's what I want to see from these GGs. But like I said, this is not a U of T squad that's just going to give them a win on a silver platter. I think you're going to see their very best, and they're going to come out swinging.
Let's take our talents from the nation's capital to not too much further west, where we stop in Kingston, Ontario, Richardson Stadium, where the Queen's Golden Gales, also coming off the bye week, are hosting the Windsor Lancers, riding high off their major win in Ottawa. Tom, I honestly don't think there's a team that's hotter than the Windsor Lancers right now in the OUA when you just truly think of that ascension and the growth that we've seen from them. Laurier and Western have been hot all year long, but just in terms of teams making strides, getting better, especially with a lot of these young players, you think about Domovsky on offense, you think about a guy like Piccioni, and sort of at the centerpiece, the epicenter of that defense, young guys in there and how much they're growing through this year, how the units around them have been able to improve. That defense is like unbelievable for Windsor right now, and that offense is getting better and better. Taking on a Queens team that is fully rested, that though we don't know 44 Justin Pace's status with where he's at with his suspension, we'd be fairly perplexed if he's still out with this one. That would make it 3 full weeks, 2 full games, and now 3 weeks since his last appearance in that Waterloo game. That feels like a pretty big deal if it's anything greater than that. And I'd actually be vehemently against that. I think that's a bit of a scary precedent to get set. And with major playoff implications on the line for this one, we have seen these teams play each other so tight over the last 2 years, including a playoff matchup last year that came down to a Luke Walton touchdown in the waning moments to win the game for Queens and advance them into the semifinals. A game at the start of the season that saw a wild one out in Windsor as well between these two clubs. These teams are defense forward. That's where they start. That's their identity. It's a little bit of the Spider-Man meme with these two clubs, and a game that I'm so excited to see how it shakes out. What are your first impressions with this colossal matchup we have coming out of Kingston?
Yeah, I am so excited for this matchup here. You talk about two teams that are really riding a high here. I mean, obviously Queen's coming off of the bye, but with a pretty, well, with a win against your Guelph Griffins on homecoming here. And some might say it was a little bit ugly on the Queen side of things, but a dub is a dub is a dub. Having that win going into a bye week and then coming out obviously in a really good spot, and a Windsor team that went toe to toe with the Western Mustangs just 2 weeks ago, only losing by 9 points, which is a wild thing to say, and holding Western to without a touchdown in the regular season for the first time since 2019. And then you make the travel. Obviously, we talked about it before the season started, looking at the end where you have Western at home and then you travel to Ottawa, come back and travel to Kingston, saying, wow, that's really tough. You give Western its best game. You then travel to Ottawa and you pick up a dub, and now you're traveling back to Queens. And I have to imagine they are riding the highest of highs going into that. And especially when you look at, you talked about how good that defense looks. This is a Windsor team that is second in yards per game, second in passing and rushing yards, first in points per game, only allowing 15 points per game, 12 interceptions, 4 fumble recoveries, and 33 sacks on the year. The next closest team in the OUA is McMaster with 17. This is a defense that has been playing lights out. All the credit in the world goes to Patrick Donovan for what he has established at this school. Regardless of the guys who were in there, you lose a Claudia Moose and you lose a move the heck out of my way, Ageli. You lose Devin Verisuk, the rest of those linebackers, and still you come out with a defense that's like this. This is unbelievable work for the Windsor Lancers, and they have to be feeling uber confident going into a Queen squad here that offensively has shown great things, but I don't think has been as consistent as they need to be.
You lose Maseo Christmas. You lose Jason Rashatzi. You lose Trey Ranson. It's redonkulous. It's incredible. It's honestly this Windsor team. Windsor, y'all got to send us more swag. I'm sorry. It's just like we love y'all.
If you made the trip down with me, I got a sweater from them, so
fair enough. Hands are tied on that one. Queen's coming off the buck. As excited as we are about this Windsor team, and again, I don't know how much we want to talk about the Justin Pace piece of this all. I truly I just think I think it'd be a tough precedent to be set for this to be the repercussions. I'm not trying to undermine the severity of the hit. It's just that to have him lose like a third of his season, over a third of the season, realistically, when you include the bye in there, is just that's a major precedent be setting. But this is a team that overall has been healthy. The offense has been clicking. That passing attack has been really going fire on all cylinders. And of course, Jared Cassar in the backfield. We know this defense is great. We know the run game is great. We know the special teams units are fantastic. You've been I don't want to say critic, but you've been the slight skeptic of Alex Vreeken on the season. We know that this is going to be he's obviously played Western. He's played Laurier. I still feel like this might be his biggest challenge with this secondary for Windsor. If he goes out and balls out, obviously I would imagine that would have to be, if you haven't already swung towards saying that, no, this guy has shown the things that can take them to the mountain peak. I imagine that would be enough evidence for you. But given the fact that I think it's fair to say that it might not be Vreeken's best outing. I'm not going to say that Windsor's going to shut him down completely. I'm not going to say that he's going to, throw for 150 and 3 picks and kept out of the end zone. just sort of maybe around average, a touch below. Have you seen enough through 7 games of action from Vreekin that giving him the caveat of playing one of the toughest defenses he'll have to all year, saying that even if he doesn't jump off the pages, assuming it's not a complete, like just a massacre that Windsor lays on him, have you seen enough from him this year to feel like he can get it done for this team, or are you still a little uncertain?
No, so I think I need to clarify my thoughts and feelings on Vreekin. I think he is a top 5 quarterback. He's probably a top 3 quarterback, realistically here, but I just want to see a little bit more out of him. I mean, when you look at the stats so far this season, he's got over 2,000 yards passing in 7 games, 17 touchdowns to just 5 interceptions. That's amazing. It really is. But the thing that sticks out most to me is that completion percentage being 63%. And I think that kind of speaks into where my thought process comes from this, is that there's too many times where there seems to be some, I don't want to say easy throws, because you're throwing against some of the best defenses here, any throw, no matter what, whatever. But I've come to expect a certain level from Alex Vreekin. I think that he should be pushing for the best quarterback certainly in the OUA, and potentially in that conversation at bare minimum across USports here. And I just want to see some more consistency from that, whether it comes to reads, whether it comes to throws on target, whatever that looks like here. But I think that he has all the capabilities there. And it's why, I've been critical of him, and I've wanted to see more from him, because I think he has more to give. And I think that Alex Vreekin, to me, if he plays as well as he can, and he does that consistently, this is a Queen squad that can make a serious run in the playoffs, and potentially, depending on who they play, depending on how they play, potentially find themselves in a Yates Cup. I really think a lot of this Queens team, and I think that it starts with Alex Vreekin and how well he can play. Now, the other aspect of this, just to flip the script and ask a question, because I don't know for sure, with Justin Pace, with this suspension, I don't think he's been allowed to practice. So you got a guy who's now, if there's one guy who I know is going to stay in shape and stay on his P's and Q's and everything, it's going to be Pace. But if he's been out and not practicing for 2 or 3 weeks, that's another huge piece of this as well, in my eyes. I don't think that we'll see a drastic drop off, but it could be a little bit of one.
No, undoubtedly that could be a part of the process. I mean, you talk about how well Windsor's done this year with the losses they've had on that defense and bouncing back. Queens obviously returned so many of those guys, but the thing that just consistently ceases to amaze me is like we went through all those guys for Windsor. I think when we rhyme off the losses that Queens had on their defensive line from last year, it's just unbelievable to think about the fact that, when you lose guys of the caliber they did, to have someone like Oliver Jackson just make his mark on the OUA this year, possibly as a first, second team OUA All-Star type, seeing Stephen Capay really jump off the page for this team, seeing obviously Eric Johnston, we've seen with them for a while, but obviously kind of playing in the shadow of Darian Newell over the last couple of years, sometimes seeing him when that went to those 4-man fronts. The fact that they've adjusted so well, like it's this theme we talk about all the time, that great linebacker play, or say it like this, great D-line play makes good linebackers great, makes great linebackers phenomenal, right? And, Justin Pace has had the fortune of playing with great D-lines his whole career at Queens, and it's that, great becoming phenomenal type of aspect for them. So, they have such a solid front seven, specifically on that front line, that yes, there is, that piece on the practice part, especially with how much we can assume that Windsor's going to want to run the ball. And Mambo presents a challenge akin to what Tayshaun Jackson did, of being that shiftier kind of back. And we definitely saw Jackson snatch Pace's ankles a few times, though there were plenty of times when double fours got the best of, Action Jackson back there. But to me, it all starts on that front line. And it starts with it's just that this defense is so bloody good, but that front line for them and how well they've stepped up in losing these guys that, we already talked about with Newell being gone, Van Wishart being gone, Silas Huberg being gone. Like that is redonkulous. That's a starting OUA All-Star roster that they lost there on the D line, and they haven't lost a step. So could there be a little bit of rust? Yes, but the fact that he's so well protected by that front line, I think is going to do wonders. And again, like we saw Ottawa get the better of that Windsor O-line at times, especially in the passing game. And obviously you read through the numbers, like Windsor's as good as anybody in the pass rush so far this year, but Queens is no slouch either. Oliver Jackson's been doing quarterbacks, laps all season long. So to me, that's the big thing to watch is really, as always, the battle in the trenches with this one.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that this is a Windsor offensive line that is real big. And if they can get their mitts on you, they can move bodies certainly here. But I think that one of the dangers that this Queens team has is the speed that they have up there. Eric Johnson has played really phenomenally at that nose spot, but having a team that's pretty consistently running a 30 front here, where you've got Stephen Capella and Oliver Jackson on either side, where they have that speed at the edge to really get after quarterbacks and get after the run game here, I think is going to warrant some additional talks and some protection scheming from Coach Beardy and the rest of this Windsor offensive line here, especially with getting Pace back in the lineup. He is one of the best linebackers that we have in the OUA, no matter what. And he's going to bring a certain level if he gets back into the game here. I think that, once again, like you mentioned, despite all of the losses, this is still one of the very best front sevens that we have. This is one of the very best defenses, period, that we have in the entirety of USports and what they've been able to do here. I read off the numbers for Windsor, and while Windsor is number 1 in points per game, number 2 is Queens. And the reason why they're number 2 in the passing and all the yardage is because Queens is at number 1 in passing yards, in rushing yards, and in yards per game. They are the number 1 defense in the OUA. This is why this team is so dangerous and why they can be so good, because that offense can be just as, maybe if a little bit lesser, but just as good as what this defense shows. And that's why they are one of the very best that we have in the OUA.
It's been amazing to watch, frankly, both these teams. I can't wait for this matchup. Tom, I guess the last thing I want to throw your way, we got a young quarterback in Domofsky going up against this tough defense, the same way that we kind of threw the gauntlet down for Vrieken to be able to say you're going up against this tough defense. For Vrieken, he's taken on this defense 2 times last year, once the year before. Like, he's no stranger to taking on Windsor Lancers, Pat Donovan defenses, and frankly, going into Windsor and, taking them out as well. For Domofsky, I mean, obviously he had to go up against a defense that we're rather bullish in Ottawa, though we've started to see a few cracks in the armor here and there. A Western team in that back end doesn't necessarily instill the most confidence, but overwhelmingly they haven't asked Domofsky to do too much on the season so far. Like, if Queens can do what we just sort of alluded to them possibly being able to do, which is slow down Mambo, slow down that rushing attack, and they're really forcing Domofsky to be the guy to win it for them. On the one hand, I kind of like that approach where the Cercellis can just look at him and say, hey, look, kid, ball's in your hand. Go out, let it rip. Let the chips fall where they may. Pick up a dub, we pick up the dub, but either way, we're going to win or lose on the back of your arm. There might be something like to be said that could help, that could be positive for him. I think one of the things that got me excited from what we saw from this year was that he has a bit of that gunslinger mentality, a bit of that goldfish memory that he's just, he'll just go into the next play. Doesn't matter what happened on the last one. There's pros and cons to having that. The matchup of Domofsky versus this secondary, given that undoubtedly I would imagine Queens is coming in saying, let's stop the run and just let our guys in the back end just eat with this guy out here today.
Yeah, so I would love to see that from Domofsky, but we haven't seen a whole lot of that this year. Certainly not seeing him finish in the end zone with his arm. On the year, his numbers over 1,700 passing yards with a 66% completion rating, 2 touchdown passes to 5 interceptions. Now he's got a number of rushing touchdowns as well from obviously when they are in the red zone and they're just trying to punch it in. But I think that right there is really showcasing where the break is on this Windsor team here. You've got one of, if not the best defense in the OUA and in U Sports, with an offense that can't really match that. Once again, you hold Western to without a touchdown for the first time since 2019. To anybody else, that should be, okay, we done this. That should be a win for us because we can for sure get into the end zone. Now, and not as if it's easy to score in the Western Mustangs because that's another really outstanding defense. But you see where I'm coming from. The fact that they weren't really able to move the ball at all, the fact that they had to settle for field goals again, I think showcases where the issues can come into play for this Windsor squad. I think that offense has to get better. And I think a lot of that comes down to Nick Domofsky and how he has been playing here. I know that if Andrew Delaney is back in the lineup, I know he can be great. Obviously, Waby Mumbo is a phenomenal running back. But I think that this is a really talented receiving core as well. I mean, we've talked about it so often. Mateo Trifon, Tyreek Quason, the rest of those guys that are out there, Colby Ginn. I just don't think that they're getting the ball or they're getting enough opportunities with that ball to get out there. And I don't want to just seem like I'm just completely crapping on Domofsky as if he's the only reason why Windsor hasn't been winning more games. But I think if his play goes up, he is obviously has the quarterback spot, but especially for him and because of the rest of this team and how they're operating, if that quarterback play for Windsor gets to a higher level, I think this entire team gets to a higher level because they've got the pieces around him to help him out in that setting.
I'm in complete agreement with you. Whether we'll see it on this day for them, for him in specific, is the question to be had. And between a bit of that, we can't really keep calling him a young man, but bit more the experience he has. This end of season, just horror show of a scheduling debacle that Windsor's had to deal with, going to Ottawa, coming home, going out to Kingston, and a rested Queens team. I lose no sleep over saying I'm taking Queens at home in this one. I'd love to be proven wrong on that. I'm certainly not going to feel like I'm some, dummy for picking the team coming off the bye that's been as good as anyone all year long against the team that's been doing more travel than pretty much anyone in the conference all year. But I think it's still going to be a super tight matchup. Tom, where are you going with this one?
Yeah, give me the tricolor at home. Also for their homecoming game, you know that stadium's going to be rocking at Richardson Stadium. They're going to get all of the engineers out with that weird, the jacket pounding on the field and everything else that they do, all those crazy traditions because I think they had a post, they're over like 140 years old, Queens, like the university is. So couple traditions in that 140-year time, I'm sure. But yeah, give me the tricolor at home to pick up the dub.
Oil up those thighs, baby. Well, let's move from Kingston to the Hammer, where your McMaster Marauders are playing host to the Carleton Ravens. Major playoff seeding on the line with this one. And frankly, Tom, I was trying to redo a bit of the math. The numbers aren't as positive for Mac in the scenario we were talking about as I think we initially talked about. But nonetheless, let's forget about point differential for right now. It starts with a win, and both of these teams right now, in different situations for Mac, much like Windsor, kind of as hot a team as we've had in the OUA in the second half of the season. And for Carleton, it's this back and forth that we're seeing. Obviously, all of us, I would imagine, had them losing going into Laurier last week. But frankly, from what we had started to see going back to that win against York, what the offense really got going with Lefebvre, then that brutal loss to Guelph, and then they pick up this amazing game in the Panda against Ottawa, and Barnes goes off. Like I wasn't expecting them to beat Laurier. I thought they were gonna have a bit of a better showing, and I'm all out of sorts, frankly, with where this team's at. So you have a team as hot as any at home, their playoff lives and seeding within their own hands in your McMaster Marauders, and a Carleton team that kind of like, can strike at any moment seemingly, but I wouldn't place a bet on whether it's going to happen or when it's going to happen. What are your opening impressions for your Marauders hosting these strange Carleton Ravens?
Yeah, I think this is going to present probably one of the biggest challenges to this coaching staff, and in particular to Coach Grandy, because going up against this offense when it is operating at the very highest, it showcases so much potential. And I think I've been pretty apparent with who I think should be starting as at quarterback for Carleton. But if you want to
Zach
continue,
George.
yeah, if you want to continue the game of we don't know who's going to come in, we're going to move some guys around and continue to struggle there this week, I'm totally fine with it. But I think that if these guys are operating as well as they can, and if Elijah Barnes is the starting quarterback here, which would be his homecoming, coming back to Hamilton, obviously going to St. Thomas more himself, that just gives them the deep threat with how well Hatchie has been playing in that receiving core, and obviously Tristan Reddy and how good he is, getting them out and saying, you know what? This defense has been playing really well. And while they are a little bit banged up in certain spots here, I expect Isaiah Shields to be back and healthy and ready to go in this one. I wouldn't be surprised to have them say, you know what? Hatchie's had a pretty good game, especially in that Panda game. Hey, Sean Underhill. Hey, Payne. You guys are first and second year players. We're going to test you out. Let's see how well you handle a go ball with one of the best receivers that we have on the team here, and really just try to put that to the test, because you know that Barnes has the arm for it, and you can start slinging 50 or 60-yard potential touchdown passes here. I wouldn't be surprised if they really try to go after this young defensive core, especially in that secondary, and try to really test and see how good they are, at least initially.
Well, I don't know if we talked about him much since we initially saw him out, but is Carter Blad still like out for this team? Do you know what the deal is there?
He's got something going on with his ankle. He's been battling it back and forth. I think it's something with his ankle and something with his knee that's he's just been kind of battling. I would not be surprised if we see him in his first start or first dress, at least in this game, but he's certainly been battling a lot of injuries, and I don't know for sure.
Well, and again, that just makes that secondary that much younger. It's going to be interesting to see. Let's flip the script to talk about your Marauders on offense. The big question has to be going to this one. What's LT's status? We saw Thalman come out like an absolute bolt of lightning to start that game against Waterloo. They're driving. He's moving the ball. Beautiful balls out to his receivers, spreading it out. Just that MAC offense looking phenomenal. They go to Barisi. They're still able to move the ball. It's still effective. It's clear it's not as good with Thalman in there. No shot at Barisi. Doesn't get all the reps that Thalman does. Thalman's obviously the better quarterback by prospect, by virtue of the fact that he's their starter and Barisi's been backing him up. Do we have any update with that? What are you expecting to see out of Mac on the offensive side for this one?
Once again, last game of the season, that same kind of mindset. If he can go, he is going to go. But I wouldn't be surprised if he's not dressed. I mean, I don't know the severity of it. I don't know what his injury actually is or not, but seeing him go down and seeing him with his shoulder pads off, because I think they were working on that shoulder of his. I don't know. And if it's his throwing shoulder, obviously that means a whole heck of a lot. But once again, if there's a dude out there that I'm not super concerned about in terms of his toughness, it is LT. I think that he showcased that a fair bit, and from talking to a few guys around the program, he is that guy. So if there's any kind of tape situation or brace situation, if there's anything that can make him say that I'm good to go, he will be playing in this one. I just don't know for sure.
I mean, I'm never gonna question his toughness. The problem is that his toughness might be the thing that got him bloody hurt. Like we talked about it all of Taylor's career, that, you know, hey, you just can't rein him in, because that sort of, you know, never say quit, die hard mentality and running into dudes to, you know, always gain, you know, fall forward and gain a few extra yards. They aren't all built like Taylor, to say the least. So, you know, it's one thing that we can kind of, we like that out of our quarterbacks. We don't like it out of some of them. Is that fair? It's not really a question of fairness. Now, Tom, one of the interesting things with this matchup is that we've obviously thought a lot about point differential as we kind of tried to read the tea leaves going into this last week. these two clubs, both at both at 3 and 4 right now in the season. Max sits right now with a minus 25 point differential. Carleton sits with a 103 point differential on the year. Them's a lot of points. And
Mhm.
you know what? I think speaks to a bit of that inconsistency from Carleton and the fact that defense for Mac has been really strong. We obviously saw that game against Western, the 30-point loss in that one. Windsor wasn't terribly pretty either. But aside from those matchups there, like, pardon me, Mac has been right in it with so many of these clubs. One of the few teams that we look back at earlier matchups they had, that York one specific, and say, you know what? That wasn't written in stone. You play that one again this time of the season. Mac wins that game undoubtedly. What do you make of just the consistency and the growth from Mac compared to the uncertainty, but arguably, but maybe you're going to argue in difference to this, that if Carleton's on their A game, I might take their A game over Mac. I just don't know what game I'm getting from them. It could be all the way from A to F and any number of things below F. I don't know, just incomplete because you didn't play the right players in there. Maybe you disagree with my feeling that at the top of their game, when they're really playing effectively, and that secondary is as good as they are, that we saw with Jake Henderson doing his thing. If they're getting healthier there, maybe getting Agamuto back, maybe getting, some of those injuries were pretty bad, but knowing that at the best, that defense, even banged up, can really hold things down in the secondary, and knowing that at their best offensively with Elijah Barnes, they look as deadly as anyone. Is it fair to say that the read on the year is that Carleton's a bit of that high ceiling, low floor, and Max a bit more in the middle?
I mean, yeah, I think both squads fighting for a 500 record is kind of showcasing that exactly. And that Mac has been pretty consistently at a certain level here, not too high, not too low, with a couple exceptions. And Carlton's been all over the place. And you start thinking about the idea that there's a very legit chance that Carleton finishes the year at 4-4 with an offense that has obviously been sputtering, going back and forth, and with a defense that is dead last in all categories between yards per game, passing yards per game, and rushing yards per game, giving those up. The only thing that they aren't dead last in is points per game, and in that setting, they are eighth somehow, some way. But this is a Carleton Raven defense that has suffered a lot because of those injuries, because losing Schneider Cave, because of losing Chris Tupin and everybody else, James Agamuto. Like, this is a squad that has really been struggling because of those injuries in the back end and because of, a bunch of stuff that's been happening to them. And obviously that first game with UofT doesn't exactly help your numbers here either. But still, I think that this is a Carleton Raven squad that is on paper very strange, because you think they should be so much better. They're actually showcasing so much worse. And at the end of the day, if they take care of business, they can finish at 4-4, completely control their own destiny here. So again, lots of curious decisions, let's say, lots of back and forth, but you can still salvage this and get into the playoffs at a good spot if you take care of business and win this last game.
On the special team standpoint, I think we're in lockstep in giving the edge to McMaster. For Carleton, I feel like it's that same thing. On the top end, we've seen these special teams units for them do some really impressive things, just not consistently. The way you were honestly describing that defense, it makes me think of like it's the opposite of Guelph, where somehow by the numbers, it's not pretty at all, yet they're getting it done in key moments. Whereas for Guelph, the numbers were kind of more in their favor, yet they're just not getting it done, both defense and offensively. Again, two inconsistent teams in that regard. Special teams, give the nod for Mac. Home field advantage, love that for Mac. Place is going to be rocking. You know that they're going to have that place filled up. I'm going to take Mac on this one. I'm assuming you're in lockstep in that. But any final thoughts with this matchup before we move into our last game?
I think that depending on who the starting quarterback is for both squads is going to change a lot of what's happening here. Obviously, we talked about what Luke Thalman means to this McMaster offense. I think he showcased a lot of really great things, especially in that Waterloo game before he goes out. I mean, he finishes 5 for 7 with 2 touchdown passes on the day, and the connection that he's building with his receivers, in particular Aiden Nemeth and Everett Reed, is nothing short of amazing. No, I think Barisi is going to benefit from that as well. And once again, we talked about it on the review pod, but one of the things that Coach Potasic has mentioned that is obviously going to be in their benefit here is that they've committed to getting Lucas Barisi in the game in some capacity in every single game, at least for one drive. The idea is that we get him in for one drive in the first half, and if that goes well, depending on how well that goes, we potentially get him for a second drive in the second half to give a change up to the offense and having a defense to try to contend with a different quarterback, and B, try to develop another young quarterback that they have here so that when his time eventually is here, that he's not just shell shocked by the speed of the game and game time decisions. If he is the guy that has to go into this because of that mentality, he'll be in a much better spot than if he was just coming off the bench completely cold here. That being said, I think LT gives you a better chance to win and win in a deciding fashion. But Carleton, man, I don't see how you can not go with Elijah Barnes in this game, especially the homecoming with him and everything else. I think he just gives another huge boon to your offense. But even with that being said, I am taking the Marauders at home in this one. I think they do enough good things here, and that defense, while being young, is doing a lot of really fantastic stuff. So I'm taking Mac to win this game.
Let's move to the final game on our weekend slate. The one that we had circled for literal months now. The one we'll be in the house for, doing a game day live, setting up the battle of the two remaining undefeated teams with not only first place in the OUA on the line, but of course that coveted first round bye in the OUA playoffs. It's the Western Mustangs hosting the Laurier Golden Hawks, both coming off of very impressive wins. Western on the road against York in the rain on last Friday, and for Laurier at home against the Carleton Ravens, as we were just detailing. Tom, 2 years ago, we saw Laurier go into Western. They get beat. Western gets home field through the playoffs, hosts the Yates Cup. They reign supreme in that one. We see last year, the tables get flipped. Western goes to Laurier in week 3. Laurier knocks the doors off them, setting up the undefeated season, allowing them to host Western and thus be Yates Cup champions. If only it were so simple. Maybe it is still so simple. But in a small sample size sport, which football is, small sample size though it is, we've seen in the last 2 years, the winner of this regular season matchup not only hosts, but raises the Yates Cup. Perhaps an oversimplification. But as you were saying earlier, in some regards, the least stakes on the table from the standpoint of where teams could fall, because we have situations where teams could possibly go from a home playoff game to maybe even out of the playoffs, depending on how things bounce. But when you frame this game as over the last 2 years, the winner of this matchup has raised the Yates Cup against that opponent in a rematch in a few weeks' time, there's no bigger game happening. Frankly, maybe aside from Laval and Montreal, no bigger game across all of USports than this matchup.
No, I think that all eyes, not just from the OUA, but from all of USports, are going to be on this game. I think that this is really showcasing what the top end of the OUA talent looks like. The fact that these two teams are the only two undefeated teams left in the entirety of USports is definitely saying something. Let's not forget, exactly like you mentioned, the teams that won this game dictated who hosted the Yates Cup and who ultimately won that game. This is a Western Mustang squad that has not lost a regular season game since 2014 at home. This is a Western Mustang squad that has been perfect at home for over 10 years in the regular season. Taylor Elgersma, for as amazing of a quarterback as he is, an NFL talent, has never won in London. No team can say that they have won in London in the regular season at least in over 10 years. That is not nothing, my friend. And while I certainly think that with the squad that they had last year and that Laurier team and how that ended up working out, if that Laurier team did play in London last year, sure, you could make the argument that they get that victory and then they still host the Yates Cup. But they didn't. They got the win in Waterloo. They hosted the Eights in Waterloo, and they got the dub there. There's something about playing in London, man. It's a pretty special environment. Although you and I have no problem winning down there.
Well, I was gonna say, Tom, who was that team to beat them in 2014?
Yeah, it was my McMaster Marauders,
Yeah,
baby.
you're darn right. You're darn right. With these two clubs, we've been looking at this Western team a bit mystified. It's weird because on the one hand, as we were saying off the jump with what Ethan Dolby's done this year, arguably of all the incredible years that they've had rushing the ball, there's a clear case that you can make, an argument that can be held to say that this is as fine a year as they've had. I do think part of what plays into that is that typically they have a deeper backfield, and your Keon Edwards of the world are getting their 1,200 yards and 8 to 9 touchdowns, but then they're having Edward Wanati with another 800 yards themselves and an additional 6 touchdowns. You could still say the same thing about this club right now, where Dolby's having a record-setting year. You mentioned that the touchdown record is with Insights for him. All the while, you got a quarterback turned fullback, turned tight end, turned whatever in Jerome Rancourt with 11 rushing touchdowns to begin with as well. So in that regard, they still have someone that was sort of cannibalizing some of the possible, numbers that Dolby could eclipse. So on the one hand, that rushing attack is arguably as good as it's ever been. The passing attack, we've been left wanting a little bit. Possibly it's as simple as saying that when that running attack is so good, you just don't need to rely on it so much. And when they've called upon Evan, like we saw last week against York, though of course we know that's not a great defense by York, but any stretch of the imagination, he still has an absolute rocket for an arm where that thing just flies off. But that defense for Western to me is really where my eyes are locked in on this one. And specifically that matchup between their defensive secondary and this passing attack for Laurier. A passing attack that, as we saw as the year started up, was looking good, not great. And by great, I sort of reference where they were at in the years past with Taylor Elgersma. That's a high bar to set for anyone, let alone a quarterback making his first year back to Canadian football in 7 years when you include his high school ball that he was playing. But over the last stretch of games in the sort of home stretch for Laurier, Cal Wither, as we talked about, has not only established himself as a top 3 quarterback in all of Canada, but on any given weekend could look like the very best that we have from C to C to C, and a Western secondary that is filled with young players, have some veterans in key spots, a do-before. Obviously, Ethan Martin returning to football this year after a few years off, coming in from Queens. To me, that's where my eyes are locked in on this matchup. I think that as good as that rushing attack is for Western, we'll still obviously talk about it. That rushing defense for Laurier can slow it down some. To me, I'm fully locked in to see, can Western slow down this passing attack of Laurier's. We saw they certainly couldn't do that last year in either of those matchups. Can they do that in this one?
That's got to be the question here. The other interesting piece is that at this point in time, the number 1 rush defense in the OUA is the Laurier Golden Hawks.
Are they on? It's still over 100 though, right?
It is over 100, but it's 111 yards that they are giving up, which is easily the very best that's here. Now, the team that's right behind them is the Windsor Lancers with 124 after already playing these Western Mustangs. So this will be a very good test to see who will be the top defense, at least in the rush in this standpoint. But I agree with you. I think the big question is going to be, how well can this Western defensive secondary keep up with the Laurier receiving core that has been so dynamic this entire year? I know that last year going into the Yates Cup at bare minimum, one of the strategies that was used, at least for a certain part, was to have Richard Adu-before just follow Ethan Jordan wherever he was going. And I believe in that time when they were doing that, I don't think that Ethan Jordan caught a ball. Now, obviously everybody else on that receiving core last year had a pretty good game as well. So it's not as if they was completely stifled, but to be able to say that you could lock down Ethan Jordan in this regard is an incredible accomplishment. Now, once again, we've detailed the differences between Cal Wither and Taylor Elgersma. One of them being Taylor being very quick in his reads, looking over, not seeing the matchup, or not seeing the spacing that he wants, and completely moving off of that. I think Cal is more willing to give guys a chance to say, you know what, yeah, you've got somebody draped on you, but I know how good these receivers are. I'm going to put it in the spot where only you can get it, and I'm going to trust you to go get it. So I don't think that that's really going to stop him from that standpoint here. And I think Thompson Silcox and Jackson McKay and the rest of that defensive secondary has really been playing some outstanding football, but this is easily going to be their very biggest test of the season. How well can you play? How well can you tackle? How well can you just run and keep up with the single best receiving core that we have, if not in the OUA, in the entire U Sports?
And the thing that too that makes this Laurier team so scary is they don't run the ball like Western, but not for nothing. They're the fourth best rushing team that we have in the OUA. And we talk about it so often. If a team's trying to sell out to slow down one aspect of another team's offensive attack, or vice versa, if it's the defense trying to, offense trying to impact the defense, you're taking away of what the other, you're trying to slow down the pass, might lighten up the box to be able to slow down the run. They got some pretty good guys running the ball for these Laurier Golden Hawks. They got some pretty good guys up front blocking. You were highlighting, and we've been talking all year, what Max von Mühldorfer has been doing. Obviously, Hallschmidt, Franzisi's had a really nice year, and seeing the resurgence of some of these guys in that linebacking core and replacing some of these major names that they've been losing over the year. When we look at that box play, O-line running backs versus those D-line linebackers, if we're sticking with the offense of Laurier, defense of Western, I'm still giving the edge to Laurier, frankly, even if they're playing it honest and not trying to maybe, add in more of a dime defensive back player instead of, whoever that Sam player might be. I mean, they kind of were doing that against York and moving Thompson Silcox more into that Sam player and having Ethan play a little deeper. So they already showed that they were going to do that against the York team. And York didn't really flinch at them doing that. They still moved the ball in the air, and we know that York can't really run the ball effectively. It's funny. Like, I was saying this to a few folks being at that Western game last week, and I've been saying to you, where like there is the part of me, and I know that I'm just going to get myself in trouble, even just sort of like speculating about this, but of the I'm trying to pull myself off of the corner of Laurier is the better team, and arguably is much better. I mean, there's a part of me that doesn't feel like that should be too controversial. They beat this team twice last year. They raised the Yates Cup. They were this close to raising a national championship and returned so many of their players, and they lose this NFL caliber quarterback and somehow pulling a guy in Cal who's just step for step doing all the things he did. But obviously when we're talking about Western, all that somehow doesn't matter, and you feel silly saying it. But this Laurier team just feels like we do that kind of, we talk about it in terms of tiers. It feels like it's a 1 then 2 though. Like when we look at these teams throughout the year, how they've played, I don't know. I think I might have given my pick away there a little bit already. It's just when we go through this matchup, because the only aspect beyond special teams we haven't talked about is really evident in the passing attack versus the secondary for Laurier. And like the thing that just still is so amazing about this defense for Laurier on the year is that, they lose Dollywall, and you almost like forget that, they lose this OUA all-star caliber player in that secondary for them, because they've been so consistent. Gregorsic, I think, is back for them this week after serving his suspension. Like, I don't know, dude. Like, again, it feels silly to feel so bullish against Western, no matter who's on the other side of it. But this is a matchup where I'm continually given a metaphorical check in the box for Laurier in so many of these aspects.
Well, it's interesting once again when you start thinking about where these guys are sitting and how they're playing. I mean, we talk about a guy in Evan Hillock and not really seeing the same level of production that we're used to seeing. Once again, doing the comparison, last year he finishes the 8 game regular season with just over 2,000 yards passing, 67% completion rating, 17 touchdowns to just 4 interceptions. And you look at this year where he's at 1,600 passing yards with a 63% completion rating, 11 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. Not nearly the same level of production that we have been seeing. Now you get another 400-yard game into that, and you're suddenly getting right up into where you finished in the game last year. But I think the point of this is that for as good as Western is, and they are 7-0, they're 7-0 for a reason. I don't think that we've seen the very best in terms of the capabilities that they have from top to bottom, offense, defense, and special teams in one full game yet. I think we've seen flashes of greatness in a few spots. I think that defense has been pretty consistent and playing great, especially in that front seven, with the way that those guys are playing. And even the group that's really impressed me from this defense has been the defensive ends. Franzese and Soren Hallschmidt, I think, are playing some really great football right now. And obviously, Angelo Longo in that 3-tech spot has been doing some great things, along with, and like I said before, the best 1-tech in the entire country in Max von Muhldorfer. And the linebackers in behind are exactly like you use that metaphor or the saying against with Queens and Justin Pace. It's the same thing with these guys. As good as that defensive line is, that's only going to make your linebackers that much better. I think this defense has been playing pretty well, but I think this is an offense that, despite having a record-setting running back, I don't think has showcased their true capabilities in a full game as of yet. Maybe you could argue in that York game previously, but once again, we talk about a York defense that really struggles going into this one. If Evan is playing at the very highest of levels and he's getting the ball out to his receivers in timely fashions and on the money, this is still a top tier team, and they deserve to be at that in that top 5 ranking in all of USports here. I just don't think that we've seen it consistently, especially against a good, solid team as of yet as a full whole. Now, if there's a single time for you to bring everything together, it's this last game against Laurier. But I think the reason why you're saying the things that you're saying, and I agree with everything you're saying, is just because we've come to expect a certain level of play from Laurier and from Western. And right now, we're getting that consistently from Laurier, and it's spotty at times for Western.
No, I'm in complete agreement. I mean, we can bring in the special teams aspect to it. We obviously saw Missouri have the punt return called back last week. We know that Campanero, we know that McIntosh are deadly returners for them as well. And Garrity kicking the ball is as solid as anyone else. Well, let's flip the script. Tayshawn Jackson's as deadly a man with the ball in his hands in open space as anyone is, and Dawson Hodge is as reliable from a kicker. So at best, you're calling it a wash on that end there to begin with. I don't know. Again, it's weird because you never want to bet against Western, and you never want to assume that they aren't going to step up in these big games because they've been in more of these big games than anyone else. I mean, shoot, we were going through some of the numbers with Evan Hillock's touchdown numbers, playoff and regular season. Like, it's staggering what this guy does. Like, Reggie Jackson is Mr. October in the MLB sphere of things. Like, Evan Hillock is the Mr. October as far as OUA football goes. He's been there in these high leverage games since he was a young pup in his first year for these guys going. But on this day, I know we talk about the precedent of this winner of this game going on to host and then winning again and raising that cup. To me, this is the year that we see the switcheroo of it. It's Laurier on the road. I was going to say I don't know how to say it, but I do. They are the better team. They've been the better team, and I'm just going to go ahead and say they'll continue to be the better team on this day as well. Tom, I don't know if you had more analysis you wanted to look at or angles. That's where I'm going with this one. I feel like Laurier's not happy with us being on their bandwagon that much going into this one. I think they'd much rather us, heralding the other purple, and maybe you will be. But they're the better team, and I'm going to go with the team I think is best on this one.
Yeah, I'm going with the Laurier Golden Hawks to win this game as well, to break one of the most impressive home streaks, I would say, in sports, just in general, to have a 10-year regular season home winning streak, I think is unbelievable. We'll have to bust out the numbers for that one to actually calculate how many wins that exactly is. But I think that this is a Laurier squad that somehow, some way is operating just at the same, if not even better than where they were last year, and doing a lot of really impressive things, both offensively, defensively, and on the special team side of things. I think they get the proverbial monkey off their back in terms of winning in London, and they get the dub in this one.
That is our wrap on the week 9 slate of games in the OUA. And we won't go through all the playoff scenarios, but based on our picks, here's the breakdown of the playoff bracket that we have going into this one. It's Laurier at number 1 at 8-0. It's Western at 2 at 7-1. It's Queens at 3rd in 6-2. It's a 3-way tie. 3 teams at 4-4, Mac, Ottawa, and Windsor, and then the Guelph Griffins sneaking in 7th at 3-5. So let's take a look at this 3-headed monster of Mac, Ottawa, and Windsor at 4-4. And again, we thought we had it solved. Then we readdressed it before we started recording. We thought we had it solved again. And then something occurred to me, and I had to start doing some math in the middle of us even talking. And I don't even know if we have it right now, but let's throw it out there and see what happens. So here's the skinny on it. Because Ottawa, because Ottawa and Mac didn't play each other, we can't use like the fact that Windsor beat Mac and Windsor beat Ottawa doesn't matter. You can't use the head-to-head records in that regard. So you throw that out the window. Bad beat for Windsor. Truly bad beat for Windsor, because here's what happens next. You look at common opponents. And in terms of these 3 teams, there's 4 teams that they all played. Guelph, Toronto, Waterloo, and Western. And we're working off the assumption that Ottawa, by some score, is going to beat Toronto. What that means is that all 3 clubs will have lost to Western, and it doesn't matter that Windsor has by and far the best point differential in that loss. They all lost to Western. They all beat Waterloo. They all would have beaten Toronto, but Windsor is the only of those 3 teams who lost to Guelph. So in their 3-way tie of the 4 common opponents they would have played, Mac and Ottawa are 3-1. Windsor is 2-2. That puts Windsor in at the 6th seed. Again, I know it stinks. It makes no sense in a certain regard. They beat Ottawa and they beat Mac. Them's the breaks. So now we go back to just Ottawa and Mac and we redo the calibration on it. Now, again, they didn't play each other, so we can't use a head-to-head. And the common opponent pool actually grows massively for these teams. And here's how it works out. I'm going to take my phone. I'm going to do the math as we go along with it. They both beat Guelph, Ottawa by a margin of +7, Mac by a margin of +10. They both beat Waterloo, Ottawa by a margin of +15, Mac by a margin of +33. They both played Western, Ottawa with a margin of -26, Mac with a margin of -30. They both played York, Ottawa with a margin of +16, Mac with a margin of -7. They both played Carleton, Ottawa with a margin of -6, Mac to be determined, though we are assuming they're going to defeat them in this scenario. Then last but not, and then they both played Windsor, Ottawa with a margin of -6, Mac with a margin of -16, and they both played UofT Ottawa, though we're assuming that they're picking up the win. We don't know the point differential yet, and Mac won by 19. So you add up all their wins in terms of the points they're ahead, and you subtract the point differential in terms of in their losses, how many they're behind. And going into this, and this is a wildly different number than what I threw at you earlier, Tom. So hold on to your butt. It's Mac at +9. It's Ottawa at 0. So what that means is that if both these 2 clubs win, Ottawa needs to beat Toronto by 10 points more than whatever Mac beats Carleton by to get that 4th seed. So if, for example, Mac wins by a single point, if Ottawa wins by 11 points, that gives Ottawa the nudge ahead. If it's anything less than that, I mean, if it's 9 on the dot, then they go back to a tiebreaker. I don't know what we go with from there. But if, because we're working off the assumption that both these two clubs win their final game, it's also amazing that they had 7 common opponents throughout the whole regular season. It's kind of bananas. But if in their victories that we're predicting, Mac wins by a score that Ottawa can't top by 8 or more points, then the McMaster Marauders, Tom, end up in the 4th seed and host a playoff game. So just to throw out a number, if the McMaster Marauders, come out of that win against Ron Joyce to the tune of 17-8, whatever, a 9-point victory there, and the GGs pick up a 27-17 win, doesn't matter. The point differential still will have Mac ahead in those wins, giving them the 4th seed, Ottawa the 5th seed, and as we said, Windsor falls to the 6th seed by virtue of how that tiebreak worked with these 3 teams. So in that scenario, the playoffs will go Laurier, Western, Queens, Mac, Ottawa, Windsor, and Guelph. One way or the other, it's that 4-5 matchup that's yet to be determined, assuming all the games that we predicted come to fruition based on point differential. Tom, it's a much different number that we thought initially going into. It was still a very positive number for your Marauders, a bit less so here. Thoughts, feelings, emotions, where are you at with this?
To see a Mac squad that at one point in time was 0-3, now coming back and saying there's a pretty good chance that you could host a playoff game if you get a convincing win against a Carleton squad. If you had said that to me at the beginning of the season, I would have thought you were nuts. But I am so happy to be proven wrong by my Marauders and the fact that they have finished off their season in a convincing fashion here. There is still a very big game that you have to come out against on Saturday in order to make this happen. And even if you get that win, as you detailed here, if Ottawa wins by a bigger margin, that home playoff game goes away. But the fact that you have it still, it's still a possibility for you, should fire up everybody wearing maroon. And I'm hoping that we get the very best that we have seen from Mac in this one in order to secure that. But what an incredible spot. And like you mentioned, what a bad beat for Windsor if that's how that shakes out.
It's brutal. It's a great, for us as fans, it's great because it sends Windsor right back to Kingston. And if this game that they have against Queens lives up to what we're expecting, you're darn tootin'. I want to see a rematch the following week. Like this could that might be where we wind up. I'm gonna say that right now, Tom. But it'd be possibly Guelph at Western. No, we're going to Kingston if that first round matchup is Windsor at Queens. And then again, beyond just the home field advantage for that first round game, it's the difference of Mac traveling to Ottawa versus Ottawa traveling to Mac. And that one's going to be a very spicy game to pick one way or the other. Hopefully we got that right. I think that contradicts what we put on social media already, but them's the breaks. Tom, let's take our folks around USports, around the league to see what's going on in the rest of the league. We're going to start on Friday, October 17th. Sherbrooke is at Concordia, 7 p.m. kickoff. Saskatchewan, CanWest football back in our lives, traveling to BC to take on the Thunderbirds on Saturday, 2 p.m. Mount Allison is going to Acadia. At 3 p.m., Bishops is at St. FX. At 1 p.m., Calgary is at Manitoba. And finishing off the weekend, the Regina Rams are traveling to take on the Alberta Golden Bears. I realize as I read off all those times, it's all different time zones. Whatever. Figure it out yourself, my friends. Those are the matchup. Tom, we have to start out in CanWest. It's been so long since we've seen these clubs. What are you looking forward to on the CanWest revival this week?
I cannot wait to see everybody back, just CanWest football back in general, to be honest with you. But the one game that I'm actively really looking at here, I think, is that Saskatchewan at UBC. I know that this is a UBC Thunderbird team that has really struggled as of late and hasn't really been playing some of their best football and kind of been going back and forth. But It's a far flight to get from Saskatoon out to Vancouver in order to play that game, and flight and everything else has to come into that for sure. But more so than the gameplay itself, I want to see who's in that quarterback. Is Anton Ammonrood out again for this one, and is Jake Farrell going to have to come back in and play some more football for them, or what is that going to mean for their playoff hunt? Because I can tell you right now, as good as Saskatchewan is, if Anton Ammonrood is out, man, that could change up the landscape of what a Canada West playoff matchup really looks like here. So I'm really interested to see what happens there and who ends up trotting out as QB1.
I'm definitely with you in seeing who's rolling out for the Huskies at quarterback. For me, the big thing I'm looking at is this Calgary-Manitoba matchup. Manitoba right now sitting at 3-3, Calgary at 2-4. Major playoff implication on the table here. Calgary, we've seen play Saskatchewan close through the first quarter and change of their matchup going back 3 weeks, and seeing them play Regina really close just before that bye week. A Calgary team that we've just kept using this term weird to describe their season. But you know what? David Jordan, when he's on his game, has been one of the most effective quarterbacks. Zion Grant for them at receiver has been so effective all year long. And then some timely plays from their defense is what's been able to keep them in games. For Manitoba, obviously, if Tuchinski's in there, you expect that this run game and this passing attack for them is going to come to life. And just again, with Manitoba, from what we saw in spurts with them going back to that opening game and some of these tough matchups that we've seen them play through, it's just a game that to me they really need to cement while they're at home. For that Regina Alberta matchup, a matchup of well, interesting thing with quarterbacks where we have Ryder for Alberta coming in for Hellinger, and then for Regina, obviously, with the Erickson show that it's been for them all year long. I mean, that's a Regina game all day long, even though they're having to go on the road to take on U of A. But it's an Alberta team that makes the switch at quarterback. We've seen some positive things from them in doing so. I'm forgetting our guy's name at receiver, who's absolutely dominating for those Golden Bears out there. So
Kettle.
Kettle, right. Beautiful. But a game that Regina needs to be coming in here saying that, like, we need to reset, we need to come and pick up a big win. But I could see Alberta giving them a bit of a scare early. What do you make of those two other games?
Yeah, I think you broke it down pretty beautifully there. I think that this is a Manitoba squad that has not nearly realized the same potential that they had last year. Let's not forget, this was a Bison squad that finished 7-1 in the regular season here. Jackson Tuchinski being the MVP, Braden Stubbs and what he was doing on the ground game, unbelievable. Haven't really seen that same level as of yet. Being at 3-3 right now, still very much your future is in your hands with two more games in the regular season for everybody else outside of the OUA. There's still lots of time to make that up and get from there. And I love that you brought up the Regina at Alberta squad. Let's not forget, this is an Alberta Golden Bears team that almost pulled up the upset against the Saskatchewan Huskies a couple of weeks ago, despite the fact that Saskatchewan is supposed to be so much better and whatever else. It really is phenomenal football no matter who you're playing in Can West. It's just a great thing to see here. But I really want to see how good is Noah Peltier going to be in this one. I think that Alberta defense, especially in the passing game, has been getting better and better as things go on here. But Nicholas Sirleaf should be easily one of the very best wide receivers in Can West. I want to see Peltier and him link up a few times here. I want to see this Erickson really go off against an Alberta Golden Bear squad that has really struggled to stop the run. Not a great matchup for them in that regard here, but want to see Regina getting back to form and really looking impressive while doing it.
Tom, I misspoke brutally in saying that Regina Alberta game caps off our weekend, because we have the Sunday matchup. Of course, it's kind of important match. It's just un petit peu. Just un petit peu with Montreal visiting Laval. So let's actually go talk a little AUS football first, so we can finish off with, again, if not the most important game of the weekend, second most to that Laurier and Western matchup. Out east, we have Mount Allison at Acadia. We have Bishops at St. FX. Again, we referenced that Bishop-St. FX game in sort of our case for saying Bishops should not be ahead of Windsor, and arguably, well, not for the fact that there isn't another, like, it should be a top 9 this week is really what we're saying, because they've had those 2 brutal losses to St. Mary's and a win against St. FX early in the year against the Salas Fagnon Les Club. Silas was in last week for St. FX, but that offense was not looking mighty by any stretch of the imagination for Bishops, despite St. Mary's seemingly just like that offense just comes alive. It's the Josh Jansen versus Laurier corollary for them, that when St. Mary's sees Bishops on that schedule, that offense just comes alive like all heck. For these 2 clubs in a bit of a bad spot, both coming off of tough losses. I don't know who you'd say the worst loss is. Arguably for St. FX, losing to Mount A, that's a really bad beat. But for Bishops, arguably losing twice to St. Mary's may be worse, especially when this St. FX team beat that Huskies team already. I don't want to overlook Mount Allison and Acadia, because obviously Mount Allison just picked up that big win, and Acadia's been looking really solid, especially on the defensive end so far this year. But I have to imagine it's the Bishop St. FX game that's grabbing most of our attention.
Yeah, 100%. When you look at what the implications are in this one, Bishop's traveling to Antigonish to play against St. FX. This is going to be a massive game here. And really, with the 2 big losses that Bishops has suffered to St. Mary's, if St. FX can get this win over Bishops, I think the way that it should work out is that Bishops would have to travel to both St. FX and to St. Mary's, depending on who they play in the playoffs here. And once again, traveling in the AUS is one thing, but being able to avoid going to Lennoxville for any of these squads is a massive piece here in terms of the travel aspect. So I think this is a huge game, not just because these are 2 of the very best that we have in the AUS, at least at the number 2 and number 3 spot, but I think for what the future is going to bring for playoff seeding and just for overall confidence going into the Loney Bowl playoffs, this is a massive game.
Well, like for St. FX, they already lost once to Bishop, so if they pick up this win, then they're even on the season series, and then St. FX has to, I forget if they're going or hosting St. Mary's the following weekend, a team that they, were able to hand St. Mary's their sole loss on the season.
I think if they finish my mentality is if they get a victory against Bishops and they're 1-1 in the regular season, and even if they lose to St. Mary's next week and they're 1-1, I think it would still shake out that St. Mary's would be 1, St. FX would be 2, and Bishops would be 3.
But Bishop still has Acadia on their last game. So I'd say that if Bishops ends up winning this game,
right,
then there's a chance that St. Mary's and Bishops end up tied at 6-2 in the prospect that St. FX still beats St. Mary's. But if Bishops beats St. FX this week, then it's a 5-3 record at best for them. It's tied at 6-2 for St. Mary's and Bishops. St. Mary's having the go ahead there. The weird situation is the one in which St. FX wins this week, and then what Acadia? Let's move past it. We already went through the playoff scenarios with the OUA, and it was rough enough with 11 teams. I mean, theoretically, it should be easier with 5, but let's move into the RSEQ football. Let's give a cursory nod to a little Concordia, a little Sherbrooke action. There goes the nod. Let's talk about the granddaddy of all games this weekend, the rematch. Montreal going to Laval. Tom, the number one thing I'm really fascinated to see in this one is we saw how effectively Angel Vital and Mathieu Roy were running the ball for Laval in their win last week against McGill. And we've seen now a Montreal team that, despite what we would think based on just sort of reputation and the players in the system and the coaching staff, that albeit against a McGill team that's shown that they can run the ball against, darn near anyone in that conference, including a Laval team that, lets up like less than 100 yards on the ground. That's to me the interesting matchup on this one. Like, we rarely see, I feel like, these games really become ground and pound matchups between the Lavals and the Montreals of the world. But there's the part of me curious to see whether Laval comes out saying, actually, we're gonna operate off the ground first, and then let the Arnaud Desjardins to Olivier Cool and all his other guys out there work sort of inside out from then, almost more of like an OUA football mentality that's not often reflected in the other conferences. That's the thing I'm most curious to see about, obviously, for Montreal with Pepe and his growth through this year. Interesting to track as well. What do you make of this matchup going into it?
I mean, my goodness, you talk about a game that's always going to mean something here. And the fact that it's on a Sunday with no other game that's out there. If you have a TVA subscription, you got to be tuning in to watch this game live. I'm pretty sure I might just buy the entire package just so I could watch this game because it's just going to be that good. But I think that when you look at the previous matchup that they played and what they played over a month ago at this standpoint, and where Montreal picked up the win. Arnaud Desjardins, 33 for 45, 309 yards, 3 touchdowns, and the 1 interception here. I think that the big incompletion difference is really what set the difference here going into this one. Matthew Raw held to just 81 yards on the ground, but only 7 attempts as well. So I wouldn't be surprised to go exactly like you were mentioning here. Let's feed Roy. Let's really make sure that we are establishing the ground game, take some pressure off of Desjardins and allow him to find his guys down the field here. I think Olivier Cool has to have a massive game in order to beat this Montreal squad. But I think that the rest of these receivers are going to do some good things, if for no other reason to just warrant that you can't just hone in on Cool. And I don't know if this spoils what I'm going, but I am taking Laval to pick this up. It's in Quebec City. That game has been sold out for almost over a month or 2 months now. You know that place is going to be rocking with Laval and the Rouge et Or fans there. Not that Montreal is foreign to that. Obviously, they play against them every year, but I think at the end of the season, what this is going to mean for the playoff hunt and everything else, I'm thinking that Laval is going to be picking up this win.
I'm right there with you. And Olivier Cool, again, just quietly top 5 in receiving. They got Geraldette as well as another great option for Arnaud. And I think it's an interesting element that we don't often see out of really either of these teams, that if it is looking for Laval, like they can establish that run game first and foremost. An interesting element to kind of see how that changes things up. Tom, great job as you by always. Our last regular season review of the 2025. I guess when we go into the quarterfinals for the OUA, we'll still be doing some USports around the league regular season matchup, but our final OUA review pod of the year. As you highlighted already, it's always a bittersweet moment. We're in the house for Western Laurier. Great games across the league. Final thoughts in this pivotal Week 9 matchup that we have going on.
I mean, you talk about how impressive or how important this week for the entirety of USports feels. I know, like you mentioned, you've got another week at least for all of these other regular season games for everybody else, but like you've got Bishops versus St. FX. You've got, albeit you don't have the Battle of Saskatchewan, sure, but you've got Canada West and all the amazing games that are happening out there. And you've got Montreal versus Laval. It feels like the end of the year with across the league with some of the best games being played right now. But my goodness, I am so excited for the OUA in particular here. Every single game is going to matter when it comes to the playoff hunt and how things are going. And even just getting the win is not enough for a couple of these teams, as you have detailed. It's by how much are you winning by. So I am so excited to be watching this. And even more importantly, I'm so excited to be watching at least one of these games with you, my friend, in person in London. What a fantastic game that will be.
It's going to be an amazing day. We got the game day live happening. We're back in action with our Royal Media crew rolling into the Forest City for that one. You know we're going to be detailing all the rest of these games, following along with them while we're there, and of course breaking them all down for you later on this week right here at the 55.